Schedules of reinforcement, what are they? Why are they important? Why are we talking about them so much? Hopefully, I'll answer those questions in this brief lecture. Let's start by talking about the origin of the term schedules of reinforcement. It comes from a book written by Förster and Skinner in 1957. It was a major undertaking, and it was undertaken because early in his career, Skinner found this interesting and important, critically important phenomena of intermittent reinforcement. And that is that he asked the question, if not every response is reinforced, what does the behavior look like? And by accident, so to speak, he reports, he found that the responding or behavior increased in rate or vigor or intensity when every response was not reinforced. If he omitted reinforcers, there was an increase in rate, there was an increase in rigor, there was an increase in intensity, there was an increase in the number of responses to extinction. And this contrasted heavily with all the principles of Pavlovian conditioning we knew at the time and still know at this time. And that is, if not every CS is followed by US, what that results in is very poor conditioning generally. Or we see other retarding effects like latent inhibition. So, the question of then becomes, if not every response is reinforced, how are reinforcers arranged? What is the relationship between responding and reinforcement? And that's the question that Förster and Skinner undertook to answer with schedules of reinforcement. How could reinforcers be arranged, or how are they arranged? Now, you might be asking a question now that, hey, schedules of reinforcement only have to do with the laboratory. And in the real world, this is just some sort of laboratory phenomenon he studied in the laboratory. But what I'd like to assert, and Skinner asserted as well, is that there's really no difference between the laboratory and the real world. If something works in the lab, it has to work in the real world. If something works in the real world, you should be able to study it in the lab. In fact, the point that Skinner made was that the lab is not outside of the laws of the one world. It's not like the lab is something different than the real world, or the one world, or our natural world. It is just an issue of control, and that is the reason we study things in the laboratory is we have better control of events and circumstances and history and so on and so forth. When I study rats in the laboratory, I can control how much food they get. I can control their living environments. I can control how much they see. If I study humans in the real world, it's much harder to control those things. It's just a matter of complexity. There are more variables affecting behavior in the real world. That doesn't mean that the variables that we study in the lab aren't effective in the real world. It's just there's probably a lot more variables affecting our behavior in the real world than in the laboratory. The laboratory, we're trying to isolate the effects of certain variables, where in the real world, we just recognize that they have an effect, and that in order to study them, we need to control other things. That's the power of the laboratory. It's not that it's different, it's just that we're hoping to eliminate certain things. What Förster and Skinner discovered, and again, these are schedules of reinforcement that can be arranged in the laboratory, or they can be seen in the real world. It doesn't matter. We don't think that there is a master arranger, that this is in the real world. These are things, relationships that we see. In the lab, we can arrange them in particular ways to study them more clearly. That's the point. But Förster and Skinner saw that it looked like certain behavior could be reinforced based on the number of responses, but they also speculated that behavior could be reinforced more as a function of time rather than number. So we have two dimensions here in which they manipulated certain features of arrangements of reinforcers and responses. One was dependent on the number of responses, one was more dependent on time elapsing. And then they paired this with a fixed number of events, or a fixed amount of time, and or random things, random events. So this yielded four basic schedules: fixed ratio schedule, a variable ratio schedule, a fixed interval schedule, and a variable interval schedule. An FR schedule is when a fixed number of responses produces reinforcement. A variable ratio is a variable number of responses produces reinforcement. Fixed interval is after a fixed amount of time a response is reinforced. A variable interval schedule is when after a variable amount of time has elapsed a response produces a reinforcer. An FR10, for example, would be after every 10th response a reinforcer is produced. A VR10 would be on average after 10 responses. It could be 15, it could be 20, it could be 5, it could be 2. The average inter-reinforcement ratio, we call it, is 10. A fixed interval schedule is after, if we had an FI10, we might say after 10 minutes a reinforcer is produced. Another 10 minutes goes by, another reinforcer is produced. 10 minutes goes by, and so on. A variable interval would be on average, so maybe the first one's after 5, the next one's after 15, the next one's after 25, the next one's after 2, the next one's after 10. The average inter-reinforcement interval is 10. These are 4 basic schedules, and they were studied heavily by Forster and Skinner, and what they found was that they yielded very consistent patterns on a cumulative record. Now, a cumulative record is the way to study both of these dimensions. That is, time is here on the x-axis, and number of responses is demonstrated, is shown here on the y-axis. And what we see is we have a plot of an animal's behavior, or even a human's behavior, over time. So we plot cumulative responses over time. And then the other innovation that Forster and Skinner had with this cumulative recorder was that when a reinforcer occurred, a little slash was made. And these are sometimes called reinforcer pips. And they show us behavior over time with the reinforcement occurring. And this is a cumulative record of a particular behavior. We're not exactly sure what it is, but that's what it is. What we can see is as time goes by, time is moving at a fixed rate here. What we see is the cumulative responses are very few. That means that the animal is responding very slowly, but as time goes by, it starts to accelerate. It starts to get faster, and then we get a reinforcer. Time goes by, we're seeing very few responses, but then it accelerates and reinforcer. So what we can see here is at any point along the cumulative record, we can see the rate of responding. We can interpolate, and actually if we draw the slope of the line at any particular point, we can say the rate is high, the rate is low, if we look at the slope of that particular line. As I said earlier, the fixed interval, variable ratio produced very characteristic patterns of behavior. They're so characteristic across species that you can actually look at a cumulative record and say, that looks like an FR, that looks like a VR, that looks like a VI, and so on and so forth. So, which one is which? Here are the 4 characteristic patterns that we see on these 4 basic schedules. And so take a minute and see if you can guess which one is which one is the FR, which one is the FI, which one is the VI, which one is the VR. You got your guesses? Okay, so let's talk about what we're looking at. Let's start with the FI. The FI says after a fixed amount of time, one response will produce a reinforcer. So we got to look at this time dimension. Is the time in between reinforcers the same? Well, in this one it isn't. Is the time in between reinforcers, that means is that on this x-axis, the time between these pips, is it fixed? Nope. It's not fixed here, it's not fixed here. Is it fixed here? Yes. Yes, it is. So if we were to look at the FI schedule, I think my prediction is it's going to be this one. Oh, wait a minute. Yes. Yes, it is. This is the FI schedule. This pattern of responding we actually call the fixed interval scallop, or the FI scallop. And what we get is within the reinforcement interval, we get an acceleration of behavior. As we get close to the end of the interval, the animal actually accelerates in responding. This is an FI scallop. So FR. Now FR, fixed ratio, means that a fixed number of responses occurs between reinforcement. So what we need to look at then here is this y-axis, is the space in between reinforcers along this y-axis dimension. Is that fixed? It's not fixed here, it's not fixed here, but if you look here, it is fixed. A fixed ratio schedule, the pattern that we usually see is something like this. This one right over here. You notice that the time in between reinforcers is not fixed, but the number of responses between reinforcers, if we were able to draw lines from this point over to here, from this point over to here, they would be equidistant. This is a fixed ratio schedule. What we typically see in fixed ratio schedules is what we call a break-run pattern, and that is that the animal takes a break, it runs until a reinforcer, then it takes a break, and then it runs until a reinforcer, and then it takes a break, and it runs until it gets a reinforcer, and so on. These breaks right here are after a reinforcer, and they're called post-reinforcement pauses. This is a very typical pattern on FR. Now the VI schedule is a variable amount of time emits and elapse before reinforcer. Now, it looks like there's a variable amount of time. It looks like there's a variable number of reinforcer or variable number of responses in between reinforcers for both of these. So either of these could be variable interval or variable ratio, but what we know is that variable ratio schedules produce higher rates of responding than variable intervals. So we're pretty sure that this is the VI schedule, and we're pretty sure that this is the VR schedule. The VI schedule tends to produce slow and steady responding. The VR schedule tends to produce higher responding. There can be small breaks, like in the FR schedule, but in this case, generally we get higher responding in ratio schedules than in interval schedules. I told you that this applies to the real world. We think we can see behavior. We can look at it and say that those schedules apply. So which one of these behaviors, what reinforcement schedule is it on? Waiting and looking for a bus. So let's talk about this real quick. Waiting for a bus. Bus comes basically at the same time every day. They come on a fixed schedule, and the schedule, when we're looking for it, when we're looking for their bus, when we're leaning out and seeing if the bus is coming, that's based on the bus coming. The reinforcer for looking for a bus is probably the presence of the bus, seeing the bus. That's dependent on time. It's happening on a schedule that's fairly fixed. I think this is an FI schedule of reinforcement. Playing a slot machine, well, you guys all know that's an example of a schedule in which it's randomly reinforced, but you have to play. So there's a response. Number of responses is required, and it's variable. Yes, it's a variable ratio schedule. Buying Coke from a machine. Now, if you compare playing the slot machine and buying a Coke from a machine, what you're doing is putting money in a machine, pressing a button, and you're getting something. Here, you get it on average, every once in a while. Here, you should get it every time. Or you put in 4 quarters, you expect a Coke. This is a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement. Playing golf. All right, so the reinforcer is getting the ball in the hole. How many shots does it take to get the ball in the hole? Well, sometimes it takes 8, sometimes it takes 10, sometimes it takes 2. It's not time dependent. You have to make 2 shots or 4 shots or 6 shots. It's not like you can wait for the ball to go in the hole. Playing golf, I believe, is a variable ratio schedule. Checking your email, though. Every time I check my email, I don't always get an email. There's not always an email in my box. If I do it faster, do I get more email? No, this is a time-dependent schedule, but it's a variable time-dependent or variable interval schedule. I believe checking email is maintained on a VI schedule. Fishing. This is, I think, a little bit controversial. I think your book, I disagree with your book. I think fishing actually is more time dependent than it is ratio dependent. You don't cast and cast and cast and cast. Often what you have to do is cast and wait. Cast and wait. Cast and wait. I think that fishing is a VI schedule. Maybe if you have a bobber, it's more of a VI schedule than a VR schedule. Working in an office. I don't know if you guys have ever worked in an office, but I did. Usually Monday you're pretty slow. Tuesday you're even slower. Wednesday you start to ramp up. Thursday and Friday. By Friday you're frantically working to get all the stuff done that you were supposed to get done for that week. I think working in an office is an FI schedule. And doing piecework is, if you're in a factory and you get paid for doing 10 pieces, you create 10 widgets, you do 10 packages, you get $1 or whatever that is. That's a fixed ratio schedule. And that's typically what happens, is that we do a lot of work really quickly and then we get our pay and then we take a break for a while. So hopefully that helps with schedules. what they are, where they come from, why they're important, and we'll go on from there. See you soon.